Session 5. Black Sea Security. From the area of tension to the sea of opportunities. Moderator: Fraser Cameron, Director of the EU Asia Center and Senior Fellow at the European Policy Center. Speakers: Levan Izoria, Minister of Defense of Georgia; Serhiy Kislitsa, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine; Luc Devigne, Deputy Managing Director for Europe and Central Asia Director for Russia, Eastern Partnership, Central Asia and OSCE EEAS; Mikhail Gahler, Member of the European Parliament.
Good afternoon, everyone. Just before we start the panel, I've been asked to remind everybody that right after the session, we move downstairs for the reception dinner, and immediately after that, at 8 p.m., we come back up for the night owl session as well, which will be accompanied by some very nice Georgian wines to help the discussion flow. So coming to our panel now, just let me introduce myself. I'm Fraser Cameron, the director of the EU Asia Center in Brussels. I used to deal also with Russia in a think tank in Brussels. And before that, I was a Eurocrat, and before that, I was a British diplomat as well. I'm just going to ask the panel very briefly now to introduce themselves before I actually set the scene. So please, on my left, you are...
Levan Izoria, Minister of Defense of Georgia.
Good evening, Richard Skols, the Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Parliament of the Republic of Latvia.
Luc Devigne, Deputy Managing Director for Europe, Central Asia and the EU Diplomatic Service. Thank you.
Mikhail Gahler, Member of the European Parliament and Spokesman on Foreign Affairs of the EPP Group.
So thank you. You see, it's a really excellent panel, building on what has already gone before. And we want to roughly divide it into two sessions, looking at the threats, the tensions in the Black Sea area, where are they coming from, how to deal with them. We want also to get some questions from you to the panel, so already start thinking about questions you would like to put to the panel. And then we also want to look at the opportunities now to actually move forward in the Black Sea region to ease tension, to look at the opportunities, more connectivity, etc. We all know probably what the biggest threat is in the area, a country called Russia. I'm sure everyone is going to focus on this, but we're not going to make it a 100% Russia bashing session. We want to try and look at how Russia can be brought into the game, if that's what people think, continue to isolate it, if that's what people think, or how you actually deal with Russia. So that's one of the issues. Another issue is obviously Ukraine. We've already heard from previous sessions the piracy that's actually taken place with the Ukrainian sailors and what's going on, and the breakthrough in Azov, Putin disregarding the 2003 treaty between Ukraine and Russia, for example. There's also the question of how Turkey's behaving. What can the EU do more in this region? Any role for the OSCE, etc. So there's a number of issues. I want to give the floor first to Levan Izoria, because as our host here, he's going to kick off by explaining how Georgia views the scene here and how Georgia is reacting. So, Minister, please.
So thank you. First of all, it is a great pleasure to be here and to celebrate with you all 10th anniversary of Eastern Partnership in this conference. And first of all, I want to say that both as EU and NATO emphasize strategic importance of Black Sea security. And as part of the Black Sea security, we are trying our best to be in line with EU's policy, global strategy, and with NATO's deterrence posture towards threat coming from Russia. And what we are doing for that, first of all, we see Black Sea as a important foundation for European and Euro-Atlantic security. It was recognized by EU and by NATO. For example, 3 weeks ago, European Council's conclusions made once again strategic importance of Black Sea security, emphasizing more engagement in the region and more enhanced cooperation. And I see this engagement as a part of security as well. It was reiterated once again concern about violation of international law from Russia, but unfortunately it was not mentioned occupation. 20% of our territories by Russian Federation. But important is that EU pursues non-recognition policy, including principles of sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity. And as a part of that policy, we are engaged in peaceful resolution of conflicts. We are engaged in more connectivity and cooperation with you. And as well, we see ourselves as a part of EU security because we are participating in EU missions in Central Africa, in Mali, the CSDP mission, the CSDP. And as I said, we are part of NATO's engagement here, but not only from NATO perspective, from our key strategic partner, from US perspective, is region strategically important as well. That's why we are participating together with US in not only in NATO framework as well as in multinational framework. For example, in 2 weeks we will have here in Georgia Agile Spirit exercise in which 14 NATO and partner countries will participate and 4 littoral Black Sea countries as well. This is practical formats in which we can engage as from economic perspective, from military perspective, as well as from security perspective. And in NATO framework, I would say, as I said, all of reforms, what we initiated, are in line with NATO's deterrence posture. We had very successful exercise this year, and we managed this ourselves. First time that our agency directed these exercises, so took responsibility, and we are eager to increase level of cooperation with you, with NATO, with US as a key partner, to once again strengthen stability here, to deter threats coming from Russia. But all of what we do in defense field is in defense of our democracy, to strengthen our resilience, and we will do our best in the future as well in all of that directions.
Thank you, Minister. I was talking last week to Ros Gottemuller in Brussels, the Deputy Secretary General, who specifically said what a great contribution Georgia had made to NATO and its various dimensions. And also you mentioned the contribution that Georgia had made to CSDP missions, which I know are also very much appreciated in the EU as well. So thank you for that statement. Richard, over to you, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, I wanted to thank organizers for inviting me to speak at this panel. And in particular, I think this panel is the most challenging to have the analysis on the security impact on the Black Sea region. In particular, that it is the hotspot of instability in the 21st century at the European continent. What we have seen starting the 21st century, the conflicts, the aggression, military maneuvers, occupation, It's 11 years since the Russian military aggression and occupation of Georgian territories. It's been 5 years since the illegal annexation of Crimea. Why I'm mentioning particular years, everybody knows in the room. But this is something that we have to remind all the time. We mean, just mention the occupation fact or the annexation, that's it. But we have to mention the time frame as well. It's not like 50 years ago. It's just a decade ago. And the latest one is 5 years ago. And this is important. And in this part, on behalf of Latvia, I want to stress again that Latvia remains steadfast in support to both Georgia's and Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. We are unwavering in our non-recognition policy and condemnation. This is necessary at any international forum, conference, to stress this, because there are people that want this to fade away from the people's memory, from the people's minds, and etc. And of course, it will be nice that this kind of remarks will be all that needed to secure the Black Sea region. But the amalgamation of recent events bring worry to anyone who is paying attention. I mean, there's not a single person that would say everything is fine and let's move on. And of course, it will be very simple to view all events in the Black Sea in isolation. Like, say, we view the confrontation between Russian and Ukrainian naval vessels in the Sea of Azov in Kerch Strait as an extension of ongoing conflict between the two countries. But however, we should really see that this is actually about Moscow asserting military dominance across the Black Sea. And Russia's military buildup in the region over the past 5 years undermines the sovereign rights and interests of all Black Sea littoral states, because it is designed to empower Moscow with the capability to assert monopoly control over the region, including to deny freedom of movement at sea and in the air. And moreover, Moscow sees dominance of the region through military pressure as a way to weaken NATO alliance and European security architecture in general, enabling to coerce former Soviet bloc countries to return to Russia's orbit, sort of say, sphere of influence, de facto. We can follow a certain modus operandi. Russia makes a move, waits for a response, and then makes another move when no response is forthcoming. Despite Russia respecting the Montreux Convention, it is ignoring bit by bit, watching how others react. And it's happening by different means, by labeling it's not a navy, it's manufacturing, or it's the service base, and so on. And with no reaction, we can likely expect more provocative and disruptive action by Russian forces deployed around the Black Sea in the future, no doubt about that. And why? Because by failing to act in response to the inspections of the ships bound for Ukrainian harbors, we acquiesce in the Russia's direct violation of the Montreux Convention and international law. And we send Russia a dangerous signal. And actually, in truth, by dangerous, I mean dangerous to us. And if NATO and key policymakers in the US and Europe continue to cede influence and authority in the Black Sea region to Russia, not only we will empowering Putin to enforce his will on Ukraine, Georgia, and a number of NATO partners, we'll also be contributing to the unraveling of the global rules-based order upon which international security depends. Just a few more points, and these implications will be far-reaching and currently unimaginable. But the first steps have already been taken. The infamous 2019, 26th of June, precedent of reinstating Russia's voting rights in the Council of Europe has been set. I worry that what's going to come next. The consequence of delaying or minimal response to Russia's increasing control over the Black Sea could be substantial. The Black Sea is but one example of Russia's slow but steady consolidation of power and influence across the Eurasian landmass. If we fail to act, it might be too late to reverse shifting powers dynamics in the region of major strategic value. And Russia has shown repeatedly that once we acquiesce in the unlawful change to the status quo, it becomes the new status quo and the basis for judging what is provocative and escalatory. And we should never accept this logic. We have made mistakes in the past, and I think it's time to learn from these mistakes, and it's that easy.
Thank you, Richard. That was a very powerful statement. I'm sure everybody in the hall appreciates it. Begs the next question, who is actually going to do the stopping and searching? Where's the political will going to come from in Washington, other European capitals to do that? That's the question. It's not a question I'm posing to Luke, because Luke is the overseer of a vast empire for the European Union in terms of its relations, but where does the Black Sea fit into your empire, Luke?
Thank you, Fraser, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I want to thank the Georgian government for inviting us again to this fantastic conference in this great city of Batumi, and on this special year of 10th anniversary of Eastern Partnership, which I consider is a very successful policy of the EU, and I think that within that policy, Georgia is for sure the greatest success. And I think that this country is very much deserving everything it has achieved, and I was so pleased for Georgia that that the President Tusk could come here. And I thank you for being here instead of being lured by the great pool which is waiting just outside the hotel. Black Sea used to be called Pontos Euxenos, which means hospitable. Is the Black Sea still hospitable? Well, literally good for foreigners, Euxenos. That's indeed a question, and indeed our session has two aspects: security challenges, and here, of course, I will agree with previous panelists that two countries, of course, Georgia and also Ukraine, are facing very serious security threats due to Russian behavior. And quite clearly, of course, the European Union remains committed to fully implement its clear policy of non-recognition of the illegal annexation of Crimea, including through restrictive measures. And Monday, as you know, at the summit in Kiev, we have reaffirmed, of course, at the highest level, the unwavering support for the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and unity, independence of Ukraine. And I could say the same for Georgia, of course. We have witnessed, indeed, a series of violations of international law. The first one was the illegal annexation. The second one was the building of the Kerch Bridge without, of course, the consent of Ukraine government. And then the third one is, of course, the system of abusive vessel inspections aimed at asphyxiating economically the south of Ukraine and the Ukrainian harbors, and beyond the harbors, of course, the region. And then we have seen also the voluntary ramming of the three Ukrainian ships in international waters, the illegal capture of their crew. I mean, the list is of course quite impressive. But I think we will all agree on that this is that we call Russia to comply without delay also with the order of the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea of 15 May to immediately release these poor Ukrainian servicemen and to release the vessels. So, to quote my boss, Federica Mogherini, the High Representative, who said, "The Black Sea is a European sea, and we do not want to witness another military build-up in our immediate region. We will continue to push for the respect of international law and conventions and to support Ukraine in these challenging circumstances." Yet, of course, when it comes to Georgia, there are very similarities, but also here, I want to be clear that we will continue our policy of non-recognition and engagement towards the breakaway regions of Ossetia and Abkhazia through our monitoring mission also on the ground and through our engagement in Geneva international discussions. But the second part of our panel is also about the opportunities. And here I can say that the EU is getting much more involved than before. I think that the Black Sea Synergy initiative that we started 10 years ago and which remains the base of our engagement in the region is, I think, also a successful policy. Since only 3 years, we have invested 10 million euros in maritime policy, 4 million euros in fisheries, 20 million euros on research, and indeed, this topic and blue economy in general, but also our support to civil society in the region, education projects are bringing fruits. We want to step up our involvement in the Black Sea Regional Cooperation, particularly in the environment sphere, also in transport, in energy. We have a new initiative also on research. You know that in June we had in Brussels our high-level conference of the Black Sea Economic Cooperation Organization with the support of the EU. So there's a lot of positive also agenda that the EU is developing for the region, and it is quite clear that this region is important also in the wider context, in the strategy of Euro-Asian connectivity that the EU has published last year. And so we will continue developing these key connectivity projects. So we are confronted with great challenges, with great security challenges, at the same time that we are very firm on this, and we have a very firm policy. And when I hear sometimes that we are forgetting about Crimea, we forget about this or that, no, we are not forgetting. But we will also develop our positive agenda. And I think that when it comes to regional cooperation, the EU has this cooperation in its DNA. The EU was built on regional cooperation amongst countries who had had lots of wars between themselves. And so I think we have a good experience to share. Thank you.
Thanks, Luke. I mean, I served for a number of years on the International Center for Black Sea Studies, along with Tedo Japaridze, who unfortunately is not here today. But it was a very good talking shop, and BSEC, I think, is a useful talking shop. But we have to move beyond that. And you've outlined some of the money that's going into projects there, talked about the connectivity. But to really affect people's lives on the ground, they want to see the results of these projects so that we can actually point to it as a success. And I think that has to be really the next step if you're going to get public support for regional cooperation, as well as, of course, dealing with some of the old hatreds that you mentioned. Michael Gala, in the European Parliament, you've passed a strong resolution against Russian behavior there. But at the same time, you know, as well as I, that ultimately the member states have to live up to their commitments, particularly in the military field. And here one must, like Mr. Trump, point the finger at Germany and say, why is Germany not doing more to build up its navy to deal with some of the threats that Richard outlined, whether it's in the Black Sea, South China Sea, wherever? Where do you stand on that?
Well, first of all, I'm proud to belong to an institution as the European Parliament that has a good record and a straight record and clear wording on describing things as they are and not trying to put it positively, we call a spade, and that we have done that since, not only since the invasion and occupation of Crimea and the aggression against the east of Ukraine. We have done that also before with regard to the domestic situation in Russia. And what Putin has done is primarily domestically motivated, I would say, because you know that from us there is no threat. But that's another thing. So when you come to the specific issues of defense, I am supporting, as by the way the German defense minister, who is a candidate for commission president, she's supporting the 2% against some other line ministries in the government. I say very clearly, belonging to the largest EU member state and to the largest European NATO state, we also have a role to play to give an example. Leading by example and not by telling, yes, perhaps we might. No, we have been part of the decision making, and so we should live up to that. But I would also say, when it comes specifically to the Black Sea, indeed, we must continue to name things as they are. So sometimes for some Westerners, for those who live in the western or southern part of the EU, in a certain geographical distance to what is ongoing here, the threat or the challenge seems to diminish. But I think, politically speaking, we must make very clear it's a threat to all of us. It is like you cannot push a needle into an air balloon and think only this part will get a hole. No, the entire thing will explode. So I think if there is an aggression against one of our member states, of course, but then also when it comes to reacting to an aggression to one of our neighbors, we must be clear and remain steadfast together. And that is what we have done. I think, to the surprise of Mr. Putin, I think he did not believe that we would stay together for so long, although we sometimes hear, be it from Italy or from Hungary, or there are some in every country. I'm not naming Mr. Schröder now, but everybody knows him. There are some in every country who would like to end the sanctions, and therefore I would also say, from my side, I'm not happy with this unconditional readmittance of Russia to the Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly. I think there are some accompanying nice texts. They want to review it in April next year. I think something, well, at least I would hope that the Ukrainian sailors would be freed. I mean, it's not only that Russia Russia acts and works against text and spirit of the Council of Europe. It is also that they are not obeying the International Sea Court in Hamburg's ruling on the soldiers. They are not living up to the verdict of this arbitrary court in Stockholm, which sentenced them, Gazprom, to pay back more than $1 billion to Naftogaz, and all these things that we must keep in mind, and not try, as some do in the West, to look themselves Russia nice. I would like to have a friendly Russia. I would also like to have a friendly Russia, but first we have to assess where we stand, and then I'm always in favor of dialogue, sure, and then also say, look what you could have in relations with us if you behave well. From the 90s, we have free trade area from Lisbon to Vladivostok. That was in the 90s already, and we were working on that. But we didn't succeed with them. They had no real interest. We offered everything. First, we helped them into the WTO. Then we said, okay, free trade, but before we need, a modernization partnership, so that we don't flatten you when we are in a free trade area. We want a strong economic Russia that we can really trade on an equal footing with each other. All these offers from our side have unfortunately not been followed. And as then the oil and gas price dropped, he could not pretend as if the Russian citizens would be better off, and so he had to resort to, well, what helps in such a nation where you cannot deliver as a leader on social issues or on monetary issues? Nationalism helps. And then reconquista of allegedly Russian territory. And that is unfortunately where we are. And we have to, I think, well, first remain steadfast, but then do on the positive agenda that you already alluded to do it with all those who are available. And that is, of course, not only our member states, Bulgaria and Romania on the Black Sea, but Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, who are, so to say, the three comprehensive partners in the Eastern Partnership who want the full program. And, well, on the southern shore, we have this Turkey, which we also did not really want to be this way it is, with this president that is moving away from Europe, who is dismantling democracy in his country. That is a problem, a separate one. They are not threatening us as such, but it's not a fortunate development. So my ideal thing would be, look at the Baltic Sea. 30 years ago, we had West Germany and Denmark in NATO, and the rest was not. And the larger part of the bank was Warsaw Pact. Now everything is EU, apart from St. Petersburg and Kaliningrad. So that is our real Mare Nostrum is the Baltic Sea. And we have seen together, when almost everything is EU, amongst the EU coastline, there is no tension, there is prosperity, there is development. And I would like to come at some point to the Black Sea, that we could see the larger part of the banks of the Black Sea is either membership or preparing for membership, or is a friendly part with whom we can deal in a comprehensive way.
Thank you very much. Well, I think it's interesting that we have a nomination for the Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, who's been to Georgia already, Minister. You said that she came last year, so she knows Georgia. We had Tusk today. We've also had Juncker. So I think Georgia, as Luke said, is definitely not only on the map, but is regarded as the #1 performer in the Eastern Partnership. Now, I want to open it up to a few questions before we go on to the second part in terms of achievement. I see Commissioner here and the lady here. Now I have to stand up to see because of the lights if there's anybody else. Let's start here. We have a microphone? Yeah, there's one just coming.
Thank you. When we talk about the security and future economic development of the Black Sea, it may be worth mentioning the 3 Seas initiative, which unites 12 EU countries that border the Baltic, Black Sea, and Adriatic Seas. It's interesting that these 12 countries are also some of the strongest supporters of the Eastern Partnership Program within the EU. And to my knowledge, this 3 Seas initiative hasn't looked at security issues yet. They've been looking at energy, economic, trade, and so on, but I imagine that's a potential. And I just wanted to ask Luc Devine, from an EU perspective, the 3 Sea initiative, do you see that as having a future, as being something useful?
Okay, thank you very much. And there's the lady here, yes?
Thank you very much. I am the Director General of EU Affairs from Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I would like to set the record straight and start with saying that in many sessions up to this one, Turkey has been referred as a kind of, from time to time, as a national security threat or other kinds of threat, or a country which has been drifting away from the EU. But unfortunately, if I have to stay within the context of the Eastern Partnership, Turkey was among the first countries to recognize the independence of those states, who extended humanitarian and economic assistance, including Armenia, in the 1990s, and extended a hand in dire situations to those countries. And it was the founding father of the Black Sea Economic Cooperation, inviting all the members of the Black Sea countries. And it's also up to the Turkish people to decide with whom they should be governed. And if we start talking about saying that we don't like the president of X country, but we prefer Y to this, it means that we are, as the European citizens, are being drifted away from the values and principles of the EU. Those principles, values, which were established by Schuman, Monnet, at the beginning of the European project, I think were supposed to be universal values. I mean, if we are talking about the ownership of these values, it depends on to which extent we are able to spread those values. And in doing so, I think that we have to have a principled approach. If we turn a blind eye to some of the frozen conflicts, such as Nagorno-Karabakh between Armenia and Azerbaijan, but only highlight the events, developments in Ukraine and Georgia and put them in the same category, I think that we will be only unfair to those countries.
Okay, that's a useful statement. Did you actually want to ask any of the panelists a direct question?
Okay, then.
As the Turkish ambassador, I will have a question.
Okay.
And also, we make 2 women, this is what happens. And gender and politics and diplomacy. my question is, do you think without addressing the conflicts, the frozen, so-called frozen conflicts around the Black Sea, which the problems on the land, can you secure the sea itself?
Okay.
So,
yeah, that's good.
this is the question.
Good point.
Thank you.
Anyone else before we go back to the panel on the three Cs and then the frozen conflicts? Minister, do you want to start off?
Thank you for your questions. First of all, it's important to have comprehensive approaches on the ground, and that's why 3C initiatives, which have only economic dimension, must be additionally have security dimension as well, because, as I spoke about, deterrence posture from NATO perspective, it means as well having more emphasis in part of Eastern Europe, not only regarding economic relationship as well as in security and defense field. That's why we must try our best to increase level of cooperation in that framework and to find more comprehensive approaches towards threat coming from Russia. So that's why I agree that such initiatives must have additional some security and defense postures as well, because given security environments poses such demands, and that's why we must in line with that demands, and we do from Georgian perspective our best to be part in several activities in eastern part of Europe as well. For example, we already discussing possibility of our engagement in enhanced forward presence, but after resolute support mission. So, and such activities, such engagements from all of NATO and partner countries, and especially in eastern part of Europe, will increase level of security.
Yes, thank you. A few points. I think the future for the European continent, it is regionalism, in a way, the cooperation. What we are lacking a proper format for the regional cooperation in the Black Sea. The one thing we have is the Black Sea Economic Cooperation format, which I have heard is not living up to expectations. What I would love to see in the Black Sea region and among the Eastern Partnership countries is actually a concrete format of cooperation, government level, parliament level. We all know the Guam, but that is something different. That is a consultation and with the EU on different aspects. But I would love to envision a regional cooperation among the countries that are, surrounding the Black Sea and slightly beyond, separately from the EU. Because what we mentioned about the 3Cs initiative, yes, it's good. It's for the first time there is an initiative that brings together North and South, in a way, in Europe. Of course, first of all, it's economic affairs, infrastructure, energy, infrastructure, security is slightly something new that is being put in and avoided. And it's not well expected across Europe, the 3Cs initiative, because in the meantime, there's also 17+1. And then at some point, I guess in the west part of Europe, there's something, guys, what's going on? You're having too many, the regional formats. Are you having your own policies in certain retrospect? But I believe it is a necessity to have a cooperation, political dialogue from the north to the south, which we lack. South to the west, fine. East to the west, fine. But we lack the north-south.
Specifically on the ambassador's question.
Oh, yeah, the final one.
The frozen conflicts, yeah.
Just one thing. Montreux Convention. Turkey, you have to live up to your responsibilities and duties in the Black Sea, particularly controlling what is happening in Bosphorus Strait, controlling what vessels are going through. accounting all the submarines and Navy vessels, particularly from the Russian Federation. I mean, so far, those numbers kind of doesn't correspond.
Yes, just a second though, we'll come back. Look.
Yes.
Samih zhvis iniciativa, tormed.
All of them former members of Warsaw Pact except Austria. I think in general we have no problem with specific initiatives. What matters is the way these are implemented. It is to develop north-south corridors by rail or by road. And then there is directly or indirectly a Chinese angle, because there are a number of statements saying that it's linked to Belt and Road Initiative, and the Chinese, I think the Prime Minister was the host of one of the summits, etc. And there, I would say that our position is on this the same as it is for Belt and Road Initiative. All initiatives are welcome. By the way, Euro-Asian connectivity, the Asian Development Bank estimates that the need of investment is $26 trillion, $26,000 billion. So even if the Chinese were to spend the money they said they would, which is 1 billion, it's still only 4%. So there is room for everybody. That is not their problem. The question comes, like often, the devil is in the details. What we want to see are sustainable projects, sustainable from not only environment, but also social and fiscal stability. We see sometimes countries, I'm not talking about necessarily these member states, but we see countries who are indebted in an abnormal manner, and that eventually leads to problem of sovereignty. And we want to see projects governed by rules. Rules on public procurement, that the market, of course, attributed according to objective criteria, and no corruption. That goes without saying, but not always done. And also market access. That if there is public money, that it also is not reserved to the biggest donor or one donor, etc. And for that, there is a quite clear EU acquis, EU legislation in the field of public procurement, and that is where it is important that it is respected. Thank you.
Michael, do you want to add anything, Michael? Do you want to add something? No, okay. I think we have to allow the ambassador a response, as the Montreux Convention came up, and it's rather an important convention.
It is, and we're trying our best to be unfriendly with everyone. If everybody's unhappy about how we keep Montreux, it's actually everybody's very safe. We are the keepers of the Montreux, and it is very sensitive. And of course, I will challenge you with the numbers, which are quite sensitive and quite intelligence committee issues, and I will be challenging the source of your information, but not publicly because of the sensitivity of the issue, because then I will have to talk about the other allowances. But if I can definitely assure you that Turkey has been targeted by our allies, but mostly by our foes, because how strict we are with the Montreux. It is the insurance of our independence. It had been accepted as the way it is because of our sovereign rights. And those sovereign rights have been challenged by many during the Cold War. And during the Cold War, we paid a huge cost, which we still suffer. And that's why it is not open to discussion. Montreux is not open to discussion by anyone. And the Russians do criticize us, do target us, and trust us, it's not a discussion as friendly as this one.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Do I see any other questions for the panel just now? Because I would like to push them a little bit on another two elephants in the room, and that's America and China. There is a feeling, panelists, that America is less interested in the region, withdrawing in some ways. Do you think that's true or not? And Luke talked about China. Is China a threat or an opportunity for the region? You have an FTA with Georgia, you have the close relationship between China and Greece, now moving into other Balkan countries. How do you view that? Maybe start with you, Miguel.
Yes, thank you very much. I think on the one hand, we are, well, I think all of us in the EU are in principle for a rules-based, multipolar world, and that includes trade. We will, if we organize it well, trade is of mutual benefit. That includes China. And when we see, of course, the Silk Road Initiative, where they are everywhere present, I don't blame them for that. I don't blame those countries who engage, especially those who do not, for instance, have from us a clear accession perspective. A transit country, if you look on the map like Georgia, from east of the Caspian Sea, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Black Sea, Turkey. If there is an offer from China, I would from the outset not say, don't do it. That's not for us to decide. But we as European Union, we should not simply look on and only react on what China is doing, but also have positive agendas. And I think at the end, what we can offer in cooperation, we can on the one hand see to it that it is compatible, that it is of mutual benefit and interest. We should not antagonize, but try to find common ground. As I said, trade and increase of trade is something. And I told that the Chinese recently as well, when they were in my office, I told them, yes, we note that. And the end of the Silk Road, I think, is Duisburg-Rheinhafen, yeah, Rheinport Duisburg, if I'm not mistaken. Fine. But if you trade and if you are around in the European Union, please, for us on an equal footing. That means no extra customs rates, tariffs for our imports in China, no obligation to have joint ventures, no obligation for technology transfer, as we do not oblige you to do it. So equal footing, and then we find mutual benefit. And all those who are geographically in between, I think they can also and will have their fair share of that all, and I can definitely imagine that a country like Georgia will not only be the transit for rail and road, but also along such a road as it is the case in the European Union, where there is a huge transit road. There is a lot of industry and services established around, and is of enormous profit for those who are along this road. And if then the rules that apply are those that we have set together, I'm definitely convinced that our rules, and if we are able to set the trade rules and all the standards, it's better standards than the Chinese set for all concerned, even for the Chinese at the end. But it should definitely be us who define it together with our partners.
It's not just the Chinese who are breaking rules. The Americans are breaking WTO rules as well, imposing tariffs on European
that is
steel.
this current administration, where I am personally hopeful that, I'm not speculating what is the outcome after the first 4 years, but definitely if he were re-elected, he would have lesser time in office than he has already spent. That is then the comfort a bit. But I really think it's not to the benefit of the US, but I have to say this president doesn't understand that much of economy and of many other things. But that's another discussion, not for the Black Sea Cooperation here.
Ricards, I mean, as think tankers have to think the unthinkable. So what happens if, in a second term, Trump pulls the US out of NATO? What are the implications for Eastern Europe and the Black Sea region?
Unthinkable. I don't want to even put this at a table discussion. I mean, NATO is not only about US. We see the commitments after the latest summits of NATO. Countries are delivering on the commitments they have made. Some are faster, some are slightly slower, but there is a strong commitment. I mean, I would definitely avoid such a rhetoric, because that will trigger another thing about the European defense autonomy, which I don't like at all, which, somebody suggests single European army and et cetera, et cetera. But what we can see under current administration, in particular to the Black Sea, there is a change actually compared to the previous administration, where they were hesitant to actually support Ukraine, and by different means, by lethal weapons as well, training. We can see in this particular administration massive change. They're even sending, experts to rebuild the ports in Ukraine, so they can actually at some point host NATO Navy ships as well. Then again, Three Seas Initiative. That is something that Trump, when first he visited Europe, he visited Poland, he stressed the importance of Three Seas Initiative. Even, back in my country, we didn't know a lot about Three Seas Initiative. That was something, okay, where it starts, what it's all about. Gradually, we understand that at some point, it is a way for U.S. interests to enter the European gas market as well with LNGs, and the Black Sea is a way to build such infrastructure as well. So therefore, it is a complex area, because we know the ambassador from Turkey mentioned we know the sort of tensions between Turkey and U.S. currently as well. But I would not suggest that if it's second term, and again the question of pulling out entirely, it's actually legally impossible for Trump actually to do that single-handedly.
Yes, exactly. There's a law was passed in the Congress that he cannot simply.
And over there, Democrats and Republicans are in majority in support of being
Minister,
a part.
do you see any difference in the American, this administration to the last? Are you quite happy with the American presence in the Black Sea region?
So we have increased cooperation with the US. We never had such close cooperation. We signed a 3-year framework 3 years ago. So we now can say accomplished all of ambitious reform, which was underlined in that framework. And now we are preparing for next 3-year cooperation, which will increase, first of all, our self-defense capability. We were engaged more for international missions in previous years, but with that support, now we are preparing ourselves for territorial defense to make our armed forces more strong, because with that strength we can avoid provocations. We have not ambitious do something else rather than defend ourselves. And for that reason, with our key strategic partner, we started Georgian Defense Readiness Program, which envisaged training for 9 battalions for exactly make them ready for self-defense, to equip them with NATO equipment. And in that process, not only US as well, other NATO and especially EU countries are very engaged. For example, we have NATO Georgia substantial package. We are engaged with Germany in Afghanistan as well, with France in Africa, and with leading role of US in Black Sea, and in special, in particular in Georgia. We want to strengthen foundation, which is important for democratic institution. As I said, we want all of this in defend our democracy. And US is very active in that way. And Trump's administration is very supportive. And we have, as I said, ambitious to increase level of such cooperation. And by the way, with US support in southern flank, we have more exercises. And in 2 years, we will have more exercises with involvement of Germany, France as well. And this is for credible deterrence, exactly concrete way to have more US instructors, armed forces. For example, first time last year they conducted training on our military bases, rotational training, and we are now in process to increase rotational training from other NATO countries as well, because more NATO, as more EU in Georgia, means credible deterrence, means strengthening our security. And without security, and it is precondition for prosperity, you have not economic development. That's why we are very thankful for your support. All of your nations are very active, involved. Turkey as a special neighboring country on that way towards NATO membership, and we introduced so-called not patient initiative, so we can have strategic patient towards occupied regions, but towards NATO and EU. We introduced new approach, which is strategic readiness, which means on daily basis to prepare for EU membership, for NATO membership, and this is for us so-called self-realization process, which is important for us first of all, and that's why we try to do our best in field of defense as well to be.
No, thank you. That's a very positive picture, and I think it's a very realistic picture given what has happened with other nations. Let me just see if there's other questions here from the audience. Is that the gentleman over there? No, just somebody putting their hand up. I want to ask Luke, though, I don't think we gave a full answer to the ambassador in terms of how serious can we really expect to move forward in cooperation with the frozen conflicts still in place? Can we go around them? Do they contribute to a solution? What can we expect from cooperation when we still have these frozen conflicts, Luke?
Well, it's obviously a negative factor instead of a positive one. This being said, we all know that within Eastern Partnership, we also have these conflicts, even between two members of Eastern Partnership. It does have an impact on certain projects, particularly on connectivity projects, a negative impact, but there are ways still to bring everybody on board, as long as those who are into these conflicts do not try to abuse fora for short-term, little tactical scoring games, because that backfires on everybody. And Eastern Partnership, for instance, is not a place to solve conflict. It's not the place, so you shouldn't bring them. Clearly, when it comes to Black Sea, you can apply the same Black Sea synergy, where you do have countries who have conflict, but you have to try, I mean, the sea is to everybody. If the sea is polluted, if the sea is depleted of fish, if the population around the sea is deprived of education because there's no investment, because isn't that, everybody gets to suffer. It's the same in the Baltic Sea. We also have Baltic Sea cooperation, we have Barents Sea cooperation, we have Arctic various fora. We have to try this. It's not always easy, but we have to try this because countries have to realize that they have more to lose by not cooperating and by trying to have this conflict contaminating everything. But I recognize I'm not victim of a conflict or territorial integrity violation. It's easier said than done. But this is, if you ask my, not only opinion, but our policy, this is what I would recommend.
Yeah?
I think we definitely should and we will increase the cooperation around the Black Sea, because we are concluding this with the responsible governments. So that is, for me, as EU, when we conclude something with with Moldova in spite of Transnistria, and we can do cross-border cooperation from Romania to Moldova, that is even some part of general programs. Then with Ukraine, we have 4 member states with direct borders. We can, also in spite of the Russian aggression, we can and must upgrade the cooperation cross-border there. And Georgia, which is geographically a bit further away, but still everything that is possible, we should do in spite of the ongoing occupation. And then, at some point, and there I'm quite convinced, this magnetic theory, when Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova prosper, and I'm very sure that at some point in Russia, before they get aggressive, they might get internal trouble, real trouble. We all thought, the older ones, the Soviet Union is invincible, and we have seen how it imploded. So I think this Russian model of organizing society is not viable. So at some point, there will be events in Russia internally. And at this point, around Russia, there are those prospering territories like Moldova at some point, and Ukraine and Georgia. Those territories that are currently not under control, they will then make up their mind and say, okay, this magnet is so positive, we will find ways and means to go back. I think it doesn't go through our efforts directly or any attempts to conquer these territories. I would not advise that. But at some point when we can expect that this Russian model of organizing society and economy and politics, when that comes to an end, and perhaps rather sooner than later, we have seen it in the Soviet Union, then is the moment that those regions with whom we cooperate get the chance to re-establish their lawful territorial integrity, and by then we should upgrade the cooperation and do the utmost to support them.
Thank you. Then I think we might gradually draw this panel to a conclusion. I think what Michael said at the end was really important. You really have to expect the unexpected. I think this is one of the main lessons from the last sort of 25 years looking at the European landscape. I recall that when I was working in East Germany before the wall came down, and going to briefings in West Berlin and in Bonn, talking to all the experts there just a few weeks before October 1989, and nobody predicted that the wall would come down or that Germany would be united so quickly. But it did, thanks to people power, and thanks in particular, if I remember correctly, to the women who were marching in the streets of Leipzig every Monday evening. So people power is very important, as we've seen all across Eastern Europe, and things can change. So I think what you said about the possibility of change in Russia, we may not see it just now, but I think it could come relatively quickly as well. So I think we've agreed Russia is still the main threat. I think we agreed too the need to stand up to Russia, as Richard said very eloquently. I think we heard both from Michael and Luke how important it is to seize the opportunities provided by the EU and other donors to improve regional cooperation, regional integration as the heart of economic cooperation. And from the Minister, a very strong defense of what Georgia has been doing both at home and internationally to improve Georgia's own security. So please join with me in thanking the panel very much indeed. And we have a cocktail downstairs.